In this week's PARSHA, PARSHA SHEMOS, at the burning bush, Moshe Rabbeinu was given the mission to go speak to Paro and achieve the liberation of the Bnei Yisrael. As we know that this first shlichus, this first mission fails. In the end of the PARSHA, Moshe Rabbeinu goes to Paro, and Paro is very emphatic in his answer that no, he's not going to release the Bnei Yisrael. Not only that, but Paro is even going to make the burdens heavier, and Paro makes a decree that the straw, which is a necessary ingredient for the bricks, will be withheld, and the Bnei Yisrael are working harder than ever, to the extent that Moshe Rabbeinu comes to the Ribono Shel Olam and says, Lo mahareo salam hazeh, why did you make it worse? And many of the Mefarshim learn, the Ibn Ezra, the Ramban, the Darchei, the Malbim, others learn that although Moshe Rabbeinu knew that Paro was not going to release the Bnei Yisrael right away, HaKadosh Baruch Hu did tell that to Moshe Rabbeinu, but Moshe Rabbeinu couldn't imagine that it was going to get worse. So that's the objection. Lo mahareo salam hazeh. So the Ribono Shel Olam answers in the last pasuk of this week's parsha, Ata Tira, and now you're going to see. Now you're going to see exactly how the plan is going to fall into place. And at the beginning of next week's parsha, Moshe Rabbeinu is given the mission a second time to go to Paro. If you look at the beginning of next week's parsha, there is a very long preamble. HaKadosh Baruch Hu there tells Moshe Rabbeinu that I made a covenant with the Avos and I promised them Eretz Yisrael, and now I've seen their suffering, and therefore go and tell them. And the Ribono Shel Olam makes reference to the four lashtonos of Geula, the four expressions of liberation. Quite a long introduction to this second shlichus of Moshe Rabbeinu. And the question is that why is it necessary for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to essentially repeat everything that he already said at the snap? It was at the burning bush HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave Moshe Rabbeinu the background to his mission. So now if HaKadosh Baruch Hu is simply telling Moshe Rabbeinu to go back to Paro a second time, then why is it necessary, forgive the pun, to beat around the bush? Why doesn't he just tell him, go a second time? Because why is it necessary for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to again relate the background and all the cheshbonos and the considerations and why HaKadosh Baruch Hu is doing this? L'chara, all this material was already said at the sneh the first time around. The truth is that if we compare the first shlichus, the shlichus that was given to Moshe at the sneh in Perek Gimel of our parsha, and the shlichus that was given to Moshe Rabbeinu in the beginning of Parsha's Va'era, we see it is not a simple repetition. In fact, there are two different ideas that are expressed. And just to illustrate one of the points, if you look in our parsha, Parsha Shemos, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu speaks to Moshe Rabbeinu at the sneh, he tells him the following. He says that I've seen the suffering of my people, I've heard their prayers, and I will descend to save them from Egypt, and to bring them up from that land, El Eretz Tovu U'Rechava, to a good land, a broad land, El Eretz Zavat Chalov Ulvash, a land which is flowing with milk and honey, El Mokom HaKnani V'Achiti V'Amori V'Aprizi V'Achivi V'Yabusi, the land which is currently occupied by these various nations. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu describes Eretz Yisrael, he describes it as a good land, a very large, expansive land, a land which is flowing in milk and honey. In Parshas Va'era, surprisingly, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe Rabbeinu there about Eretz Yisrael, he says, this is the land in which the Avos lived. I swore, I promised it to the Avos. Eretz Mugureim Asher Garu Ba, this is the land in which they dwelt. There is no mention of it being a good land, a broad land, a land flowing in milk and honey. Eretz Yisrael is described as a land to which we have a historical attachment. It was the land in which the Avos lived. It was the land that was promised to them. It was promised to them that their descendants would inherit it. So it's very interesting, because apparently we're not dealing with the same message. Whereas in our parsha, the emphasis is on the quality of the land. It's tova, rechava, zavas chalov udvash. In Parshas Vayera, the emphasis is really on the historical attachment to Eretz Yisrael. This is the land of the Avos. This is the land where we had our roots. Now, how do you account for that difference? But the truth is, the fact that the two missions are really different is really evidenced by other factors. Because if we compare the reactions of Paro, the first time around, when Moshe Rabbeinu comes to Paro, and he delivers the message in the name of the Ribono Shel Olam, Paro's answer is emphatic. First he says that Lo Yadati es Hashem, I don't know who you're talking about, this Hashem, V'gam es Yisrael lo Ashaleach, and I'm not going to send the Jews out. So it's no with a capital N. N-O, I'm not sending the Jews out. And furthermore, Paro is angry. Lama Moshe v'Aaron, why Moshe and Aaron do you disturb everyone from their work? Because we have a wonderful system, everyone is working hard, everyone is productive, and you two rabble-rousers are turning over the apple cart, you're disrupting everything. So Paro is not only emphatic, but he's also indignant that Moshe and Aaron are coming with these ideas of freedom. Moshe Rabbeinu apparently understands that the second shlichus is different. Because there's an amazing thing in Parshas Vayera. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu sends Moshe on the second shlichus, so first Hashem tells him, go to the Bnei Yisrael and speak to them, and then go and speak to Paro. So it says, when Moshe Rabbeinu the second time around went to the Bnei Yisrael, it says, V'lo shomu al Moshe. At that point they didn't listen. Mikotze ruach me'avoda kasha. The situation was too hard, the tribulations, the troubles, they didn't have the peace of mind to listen. So then, HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe, okay, they didn't listen, go to Paro. So Moshe Rabbeinu says, if the Bnei Yisrael didn't listen to me, Paro was going to listen to me. Rashi points out this is one of 10 kal v'chomers that are mentioned in the Torah, 10 logical inferences, that if the Bnei Yisrael didn't listen, Paro was going to listen. L'chayra, Moshe Rabbeinu could have asked better. He didn't have to make a kal v'chomer from the Bnei Yisrael. If the Bnei Yisrael didn't listen, Paro should listen. He could have asked better. Paro didn't listen the first time, why should he listen the second time? It's a better argument. Elamai, we're drawn to the inescapable conclusion that the second shlichus is fundamentally different than the first shlichus. The fact that Paro didn't listen the first time is no indicator he won't listen the second time. The only kasha that Moshe can ask is that if the Bnei Yisrael didn't listen the second time, so Paro shouldn't listen the second time. But the first time is totally different. The fact that Paro didn't listen the first time is totally irrelevant. This is a new shlichus. It's a different message, a separate message. We have to understand how is the message different. And more interestingly is that Paro's reaction talk is different. Because if you look in Parshas Vayera, it says that when Moshe Rabbeinu was about to go to Paro, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu forewarned Moshe Rabbeinu. He says, you know that Moshe Rabbeinu, I'm telling you, that when you go to Paro and tell him your message, you know what Paro's reaction is going to be? He's going to say, Tnu lochem, give a sign, prove it. Prove it. Because you're claiming that you're speaking in God's name, prove it. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu armed Moshe Rabbeinu with miracles. He said that when he asked you for the miracles, first turn your staff into a snake, and if that doesn't work, you'll turn water into blood. So now you have miracles. You can prove you're representing me. Which is an amazing thing. That the first time around, it never gets that far. Paro doesn't ask for any proof. Paro just says no without asking for proof. Says, I'm not interested. Mi Hashem asher eshma b'kolo, who is Hashem? I'm not interested, even if you're coming in his name. I don't care. And he's angry with Moshe and Aaron. It doesn't even get to the point where there's proof. It almost seems that in the second shlichus, Moshe Rabbeinu was making an argument that Paro cannot avoid dealing with. the only thing that Paro can do is suspect that it might be above a Maaseh, that maybe Moshe Rabbeinu was making it up. But if it's true, Paro has to consider it very carefully. And therefore the only thing Paro can say is, give me a sign, prove it. But once Moshe proves it, then Paro has to be very careful. He's walking on eggshells. He's dealing with a decision which is very, very, very important. Which seems very, very strange. That in the first Lichus, Paro was able to dismiss it emphatically. I'm not listening, I'm not interested. And furthermore, he's even indignant with Moshe and Aaron to the extent that he makes things worse. And the second time around, Paro is very, very wary. He says, prove it. Prove me that you're coming in God's name. But once Moshe proves it, then Paro has to consider it. Not that he's going to give in immediately. As we know, it took 10 makas. But it's something which requires a lot of consideration. It's something that you can't easily dismiss. So again, apparently the second shlichus is very different than the first shlichus. What is the difference? What is the difference in the first mission and the second mission? Now, to really understand this parsha, I'd like to make a historical analogy. And this will really explain the difference between the two missions, and really a lot of the pratim, a lot of the details of the parsha will fall into place if we understand this. In the 6th Zionist Congress, I believe it was 1903, a proposal was raised that was called the Uganda Plan, that instead of agitating for a Jewish homeland in Eretz Yisrael, the British would give the Jews a piece of land in Africa. Really, it's more in Kenya than Uganda, and this would be the place where the Jews could establish a homeland. Herzl was all for it. He held this was a great idea, and it would be much easier to get international acceptance for this plan. Palestine was a land that was there were other claimants to it, so he was for this plan. And there was vigorous debate. The proposal was defeated in the 7th Zionist Congress. Because what was the issue? Herzl, his view of Zionism was that Zionism was to solve the problem of European anti-Semitism. In other words, Jews are oppressed in France, Germany, other countries. He was a reporter for a Swiss paper. He reported on the Dreyfus trial in France. He was very conscious of Jewish oppression, anti-Semitism in Europe, and therefore the solution to the problem is to have a place, not in Europe, a place of our own, where we'd be in control and be free from anti-Semitism. Herzl was an assimilated Jew. The traditional heritage and the traditional connection to Eretz Yisrael, through Torah, through mitzvahs, was something that he had no kesher to, no link with. And therefore to him, it made no difference. Israel would be nice, but Uganda could be just as good. The followers of Herzl, the people that were the rank and file of the Zionist movement, were not assimilated Jews. It was a very interesting thing that Herzl was not able to gain inroads among Western Europeans. His followers really were Eastern Europeans, who, if not religious, were nevertheless very much steeped in traditional ways of thinking. He actually had quite a bit of disdain for them. He referred to them as my army of schnorrers. He really looked down at the Eastern European Jews, but you work with what you have, and these were his followers. To these people, the Mesiras Nefesh, the sacrifice that would be necessary to uproot themselves from the European settlement of Jews, wherein they had very deep roots, and to build a new land, could not be done in Uganda. The sacrifice and the motivation that was needed could only be aroused in as much as it was the fulfillment of the deep, deep aspirations of the Jewish people for their traditional homeland, the place where they had such deep historic roots. And the truth is that Im Kol Zeh, despite the fact that the Jewish state is in Eretz Yisrael, the reality we have to face is this, that in the religious community, there is a certain, I don't want to say hostility, in certain circles it is hostility, but in other circles a certain apathy, a certain lack of intense devotion for the idea of a Jewish state. And it really is precisely rooted in this idea that the mere fact that it's in Eretz Yisrael isn't enough. Because if it will be a fulfillment of the messianic prophecies, a fulfillment of Nevuos, a fulfillment of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's plan for history, that would be something that the religious personality would be attracted to and devote himself to. But the question is, what is the nature of a Jewish state as it currently exists? Is it just a fact on the ground? Or is it really the kiyum? Is it the fulfillment of prophetic vision? And this is where you have the division between the religious Zionists and the Haredim. The religious Zionists see the modern state of Israel at least as an aschalta, at least as a beginning of the process of redemption. If it's not the completion of the process, at least it's the beginning of the process. And therefore to them it has biblical and prophetic significance. And therefore there's a greater devotion, greater Mesiras Nefesh, if you will, to upholding and maintaining what's already been achieved. And among the Haredim, and again, there's a spectrum of opinions, it's a fact. It may be that we have to work with it and perhaps support it and perhaps participate in it, but they don't see it as the fulfillment of the biblical prophecies, and therefore there's no love lost in their relationship with the Medina. This is really the issue that is the underlying issue in modern political philosophy. Why do I mention this? Because Moshe Rabbeinu was also an outsider. And the Ramban explains, and we'll point out where the Ramban says it, that Moshe Rabbeinu was not steeped in the Jewish tradition. Moshe Rabbeinu was raised in the house of Paro, as we know from earlier in the PARSHA. He was exiled from Egypt at a very, very young age. The Ramban says that all the traditions that the Bnei Yisrael maintained, the traditions going back to the Avos, of redemption, of Geula, of the famous code of Pakod Yifkod, the password that the Navi would have to give to establish his bona fides, Moshe Rabbeinu had no access to any of this tradition. As the Ramban says, Moshe Rabbeinu was essentially an outsider. And therefore, when Moshe Rabbeinu speaks to HaKadosh Baruch Hu at the Sneh, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu presents to him the plan, this is the plan, this is what I'm going to do. So to Moshe Rabbeinu, he doesn't present it as the fulfillment of a historical, biblical, prophetic vision, an age-old connection spanning millennia between this people and this land. It's presented as Uganda. It says the Jews are suffering, they're in Mitzrayim, they're enslaved. There's a land over there, it's an Eretz Tova, Rechava, it's a good land, it's a broad land, plenty of room, Eretz Dovas Chalav Udvash, it's a land flowing with milk and honey, agricultural bounty. So my plan is, we're going to take the Jews out of Mitzrayim and bring them there. And that's really how you present the whole idea of Yetzias Mitzrayim to an outsider. It's not represented as, this is the land where the Avos were from, this is where they lived, this is the land where I swore to give it to them. All that would have no resonance with Moshe Rabbeinu at this stage of his life. Moshe Rabbeinu is essentially an outsider. He is disconnected from Jewish tradition. But he has a very strong sense of social justice. It's wrong for a tyrant king to enslave innocent people. So therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu presents the case to him just as you would expect. Right? There's a good land over there, and I'm going to take the Jews out and bring them there, and they'll live happily. And that's very, very good. Comes Moshe Rabbeinu and asks HaKadosh Baruch Hu, this is all in Perek Gimel, that when I go to the Bnei Yisrael, they're going to ask me what your name is. What should I say? Now we all know that the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not just a proper name. The Shemos of HaKadosh Baruch Hu really relate to the way in which HaKadosh Baruch Hu is conducting himself. So Moshe Rabbeinu wants to know, what should I tell the Bnei Yisrael? This Geula, this redemption that you're promising, what is the idea behind it? And very interestingly, if you read the Psukim carefully, you'll see that what HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe Rabbeinu is that the Bnei Yisrael, you should describe it very differently. Because the Bnei Yisrael, as we said, are steeped in the tradition. And they have a Masorah that goes all the way back to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And therefore to them, you don't present it as simply relief from anti-Semitism. To them, you relate the prospect of Geula as part of a vision for history. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, tell them that my name is Ekyeh Asher Ekyeh. I will be and I will be. Now Rashi brings the Chazal that what Moshe Rabbeinu was saying was that I will be with them in this tzara and I will be with them in future tzaras. And what does that mean? That means that it's not about relief from this particular episode of anti-Semitism. It's not what it's about. It's about a relationship, a historic relationship that Klal Yisrael is going to have with the Ribono Shel Olam, which is not going to end. It's not that I'm going to take you out of Mitzrayim, put you in Eretz Canaan, and that's the end of that. There's going to be an ongoing relationship, an ongoing connection. I'm going to protect you, I'm going to save you, I'm going to help you, until the end of time. So what the Baruch is telling Moshe Rabbeinu is that to you, I'm presenting it as Uganda. Because you're an outsider. From your perspective, that's what resonates in your mind. But to them, I present this as part of a historical phenomenon. It begins now, but it's going to continue to the end of time. And Moshe Rabbeinu objects. And Moshe Rabbeinu says, no, can't do that. Can't say that. Says, Dayom, it's enough for the current Sarah. Let's not focus on the future, on history. Says, let's deal with the present. Let's deal with the current issue. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, okay, Ekyesh, tell them Ekyesh L'chani Alechem. Don't say Ekyesh or Ekyesh, just say Ekyesh L'chani Alechem. Now that Rashi itself you have to understand. It's Ma'amar Chazal Gemara, Brachas. What does it mean? Like Moshe Rabbeinu stumped the Ribono Shel Olam that HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, tell them Ekyesh or Ekyesh. And Moshe Rabbeinu says, no, you can't say that, because Daya L'tzara B'shaita, we'll worry about the future later. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, you know, I didn't think of that. You're right. Right? What's the pshat in the parsha? The pshat in the parsha is PARSHA, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was right. But you work with what you have to work with. Because Moshe Rabbeinu, from his perspective, said that the issue now is not the historical relationship. The issue is dealing with the current crisis. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, okay, listen, this is my shliach. I have to work with who I work with. So okay, that's what you'll go in and tell them. So then the parsha goes on. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe Rabbeinu exactly what he's meant to say to Paro. And we're just reading the psukim. So it says like this, go to Paro and say the following. Say that Hashem says, go gather the Ziknei Yisrael, bring the Ziknei Yisrael with you, and go to Paro and say, Hashem Elokei ha'ivrim nikra aleinu, that Hashem, the God of the Hebrews, appeared to us and said that we should go into the desert, 3 days journey, and bring korbanos. That's what you should say to Paro. What does it mean? Hashem Elokei ha'ivrim, ha'ivriim, the Hebrews. Now this is very, very, very significant. I can't minimize the importance of this. Because when we go ahead, when Moshe actually went to Paro, we find an amazing thing. That the Shakla V'Tarya, the discussion between Moshe and Paro, is very, very complex. You see, it says like this. This is the head of Parakeh. When Moshe first comes to Paro, the first time, and interestingly, he comes without the Ziknei Yisrael. He comes without the Ziknei Yisrael. It's a famous Rashi, very, very cute Rashi. The Rashi is Moshe gathered the Ziknei Yisrael, and as they approached Paro's house, the Ziknei Yisrael disappeared one at a time, and now it's just Moshe and Aaron. We'll talk about the significance of that in a few moments. Moshe says like this. He says, Koi Amar, so says Hashem Elokei Yisrael. Hashem, the God of Israel. Now Moshe was told to say Hashem Elokei Ha'Ivriim, the God of the Hebrews. And Moshe says Hashem Elokei Yisrael. Shalach Asami, send out my people, v'yachol b'li b'midbar. To which Paro says, Mi Hashem asher eshma b'kolo. Who is this Hashem that I should listen to? I'm not going to send the Jews out. Just as an aside, I'll mention something cute. What does it mean? Who is this Hashem? And I'm not going to send the Jews out. What's the double lashon? Like the mashal. You know, sometimes, let's say your eyeglasses are bent. So you can go to the optometrist who sold you the glasses. They'll certainly fix them. But let's say you're out of town, you're in another town. So you can go to a local optometrist. He'll fix it as a courtesy. Why? This is a courtesy optometrists extend to one another. Even if it's not my responsibility, I didn't sell you the glasses, but, you know, I'll fix the ones he sold you, he'll fix the ones I sold you. It's a courtesy we extend to one another. So Paro says like this. So listen, says, I'm not subject to the authority of that God. You know, if you ask a small favor, and I do it as a courtesy, right? But this is a big thing you're asking. I should send out a whole nation of slaves. So he said like this, Mi Hashem asher eshma b'kolo. I don't know this God. I'm not subject to his authority. So I should do it as a courtesy? No, it's too big a favor, right? I'll fix the bent glasses. I'm not going to replace the broken lens. You know, that's a little too much. That you have to go back to the person who's responsible. So Paro says, listen, I'm not interested. So all of a sudden, Moshe hits a brick wall. He expected that he get a positive answer. And all of a sudden Paro says emphatically no. So then Moshe Rabbeinu says, Vayomru, Moshe and Aaron said like this, Elokei ha'ivrim nikra aleinu. All of a sudden he mentions the God of the Hebrews appeared to us. Neil chana derech shlosha semen b'midbar. Let us travel 3 days in the desert. V'nizbuch al Hashem Elokeinu, and we'll bring korbanos. Pen yifka'enu b'dever u'b'charav, lest we be smitten by pestilence or by the sword. Now, the Ramban points out that this seems something new. There never was any threat of being smitten by pestilence or by the sword. The Ramban says a very interesting pshat. He says that this is the site of korbanos. What is the idea of korbanos? Why do we bring korbanos? We bring korbanos to protect us from all sorts of misfortunes. So what the Baruch told us to bring korbanos, we have to suspect that perhaps we are susceptible to some type of misfortune, and therefore he tells Paro, listen, we have to go to the midbar because it will be smitten by pestilence or by the sword. Now, the question is this. The question is, what is going on over here? Paro already said no. Like Moshe is offering a second argument. So the Malbim learns, pshat is like this, very beautiful pshat. The first time HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Moshe Rabbeinu is transmitting an order to Paro. So listen, I have orders. Orders. Hashem said, you should send us out. It's an order, command. So to that, Paro says, I don't listen to Hashem, I'm not subject to his authority, I'm not going to send the Jews out. So Moshe Rabbeinu says, well, let me put it differently, right? That this is in your interest to send us out. This is why. Because Hashem appeared to us and said we should bring korbanos. Now if you don't bring korbanos, what can happen? We can be smitten by pestilence or by the sword. In which case you're going to lose your slaves. So therefore letting us go is going to be a win-win situation. Because if you don't let us go, you might lose all your slaves anyway. So better let us go for 3 days. This way we'll have the 3 days that we want of vacation. You'll save your slaves. It's win-win. So Moshe Rabbeinu was offering two arguments. His first argument is a command. You must do this because there's a higher authority which demands this of you. To which Paro says, no, there is no higher authority. I don't accept that there's another God. There is no Hashem. I'm not listening. I'm not sending the Jews out. Finished. So now Moshe Rabbeinu says, well, wait a minute. Okay, it's not a command. But, this is a good idea. This is an Eitzah Taiva. Well, if so, now we're going to where Moshe Rabbeinu arouses Paro's anger. Because, it's one thing if you're coming with a command from God. So Paro's not going to get angry at Moshe Rabbeinu. You don't shoot the messenger, as the saying goes. But you're giving me advice? You're telling me what to do? So the first thing is mind your own business. And that's exactly what he says. He says, Lama Moshe v'Aaron tafri wasami masov. Why are you disrupting the people? Go home and do your own work. Meaning, mind your own business. Don't give me advice. Don't tell me what to do. These are my slaves. Or you're telling me what to do? He says, go home and do your own thing and leave me alone. But secondly, he says, more than that, Hein Rab Mata Amoritz. It's a big nation we're talking about. You're disrupting them from their work. This is a big loss. So the Pasha, the Pshat in the Parsha is that first Moshe is transmitting a command. To that Paro says no. The second thing is Moshe is giving advice. Right? He's giving advice. Listen, this is in your better interest. Let the people go. So to that, Paro answers, don't give me advice. Mind your own business, and don't tell me what's good for me. I know better. To the contrary, to let the slaves go is much worse because there's a lot of work that's going to be left undone. That's the simple reading of the Parsha. But if you look at the Medrash Tanchuma, the Medrash Tanchuma says something else over here. The Medrash Tanchuma says that Moshe Rabbeinu, after he made his first argument, said to himself, maybe I made a mistake. Because when I spoke to Paro, I said, Hashem Elokei Yisrael. And I should have said, Hashem Elokei HaIvrim. So that was perhaps the mistake. So Moshe was going to correct that mistake. So the second time he speaks to Paro, and he says, Hashem Elokei HaIvrim. And Paro flies off the handle at that point. And the question is, what difference does it make? Like, what difference does it make whether you say Hashem Elokei Yisrael, whether you say Hashem Elokei HaIvrim? What's the issue? Why is that so important? That must be the mistake. Do you know why Paro said no? Because I said Hashem Elokei Yisrael. But if I would have said Hashem Elokei HaIvrim, Paro would have listened. What's the issue? The issue is very, very, very simple. We think of Yisrael as being an ancient name. From our vantage point, it's ancient. It goes all the way back to Yaakov Avinu. But for the Jews in Mitzrayim, Yisrael was a very recent name. Yisrael was the name that was given to Yaakov not long before he went down to Mitzrayim. That the nation should be referred to as Yisrael is something new. The classic name of the Jewish people was Ivrim. Avram is Avram HaIvri. So the question is like this. What are you referring to HaKadosh Baruch Hu as? Are you referring to as the current God? This is the God who is currently the God of this people. Or are you referring to God as the God with whom we have an ancient, age-old relationship? And that's really the issue. And why is it so important? The reason it's important is this. You see, Paro understands something that the many slave masters did not understand. Some did, but many didn't. They can really only enslave a people if the people acquiesces. If the people are willing to be slaves. If the people have a yearning for freedom, if they want to be free, they can undermine the regime in an assortment of ways. So the question is like this. When Moshe Rabbeinu comes the first time, he comes representing Hashem Elokei Yisrael, which does not imply a historic relationship. No, this is a God who steps on the scene, he sees an injustice, and he wants to do something about it. So Paro doesn't have to be scared of that. He doesn't have to be scared that he's going to lose the loyalty of the people. All he has to do is say no. Right? Not interested? Mi Hashem SHMOT b'kolo. Not interested? No, forget it. Not letting the people go. Moshe Rabbeinu understands, wait a minute, there's a mistake. What's the mistake? The mistake is that I should have put it differently. I should have said that here we're dealing with a historical connection. I should refer to God as the Lokei HaIvrim. So your first Lokei HaIvrim, at that point, Paro loses it. Paro realizes a very great danger. Because if the people truly have this conception of God, with whom they have a historical relationship, who has a plan for their destiny, now there's something that we have to be concerned about. We can lose the people. But on the other hand, it may be that this is just a bluff of Moshe and Aaron themselves. Because remember, at this point, Moshe and Aaron are not with the Ziknei Yisrael. The Ziknei Yisrael all disappeared. This is just two people standing there. So Paro says to himself, listen, it may be that the people don't have these deep connections to God. It may just be that Moshe, Rabbeinu, and Aaron are two rabble-rousers who are trying to create this sentiment among the people, so therefore we can still nip this in the bud. So first of all, we nip it in the bud by responding to Moshe and Aaron with great indignation and great anger, and we nip it in the bud because we realize that, feelings of freedom are spawned by people enjoying freedom. If we make the burdens more crushing, they won't have the menuchas nefesh, the peace of mind, to even think thoughts of being free. Therefore, we can nip this thing in the bud. This is exactly what Paro does. And Paro says, no straw, you have to work harder. Now, the Medrash says something even more interesting. The Medrash says that when Paro made that decree, he said, Al yishu b'divrei sheker. Let them work harder, and let them not how would you say this? Let them not pay attention to false words. That's how the English translates it. But the Medrash Tanchuma says an amazing thing. The Medrash Tanchuma says that the Jews had Megillas. They had scrolls that they used to delight in. They would be mishtashea with every Shabbos. Shabbos was a day off. We'll see why in a moment. It was a day off. And what do they do on their day off? They used to read these Megillas that talked about the old promises of the Gula, of the redemption, going back to the days of the Avos, and they would read these things. And Paro said part of the decree was not only that no more straw, Paro also was geyser that from now they'd have to work on Shabbos. They shouldn't be mishtasheh, they shouldn't delight in these false words. They shouldn't read these Megillas anymore. Now it happens to be a very interesting thing. When you think about it for a second, when did Shabbos become a day off for the Egyptian slaves? Chazal say that Moshe Rabbeinu back, when he was a young man in the house of Paro, gave Paro this advice. He says, if you give him a day off once a week, right, it'll be better. And Paro said, no, not a bad idea. So the original Paro gave a day off on Shabbos, so Shabbos became the day off. But this Paro discovers, what are they doing on their day off? So if on their day off they'd be playing golf, going to the beach, making a barbecue, that would be fine, no problem. It's very good. A little R&R, the other 6 days much harder. But instead, what are they doing? They're being mishtashea, they're reading these Megillas, which contain fantasies of the ultimate redemption and Gula. Says we have to nip this in the bud. This is the problem. But to suspect that it was Moshe Rabbeinu who was fomenting this is a very reasonable suspicion, because keep in mind, they were doing this on Shabbos. Who brought Shabbos to the Jewish slaves? Was Moshe Rabbeinu years and years ago. So this is all part of his plan. This is his plan to create a dissatisfaction in the Jewish people. He gets a day off for them. He gives them Megillas to read on the day off, which are filled with all this subversive talk about redemption. And that's why we're in the mess we're in now. So we have to nip this in the bud. So first Moshe Rabbeinu has to be put in its place, which Paro does. And as far as the people goes, we're going to nip this in the bud. No more Shabbos, no more Megillas, no more talking about thoughts of freedom, and this is it. Paro understands that if Moshe Rabbeinu was coming simply with an order, listen, God said, free the Jews, it's a crime to enslave innocent people, to that Paro can say no. But if Moshe Rabbeinu is making a credible argument that there is a historic yearning for freedom on the part of the Jewish people, this is something which Paro has to be very, very careful about. But Paro, at this point of the story, has the luxury of being able to believe that this is the work of two rabble-rousers, Moshe and Aaron. Why? Because they didn't come with the Ziknei Yisrael. And that's why the disappearance of the Ziknei Yisrael is very, very important. HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Moshe Rabbeinu, bring the Ziknei Yisrael and tell Paro that you're being sent by Elokei HaIvrim. Paro won't be able to reject that out of hand. Because if he sees that it's not just two rabble-rousers, but there's a representation of the Jewish leadership, and they are speaking in the name of Elokei HaIvrim, then Paro will have to consider what you're saying very, very carefully. But the Ziknei Yisrael drop out. Why did the Ziknei Yisrael drop out? It's very possible why the Ziknei Yisrael drop out. Because when Moshe Rabbeinu went to Paro, how did he present it to Paro? He presented it as Hashem Elokei Yisrael. Undoubtedly, that's what he told the Ziknei Yisrael the mission was going to be. So, as we said, the Ziknei Yisrael, this didn't win their imagination. This didn't win them over. If Moshe Rabbeinu was going to come to Paro and say, listen, there's a higher authority who says that you're guilty of a moral crime, that you have to release the Jewish people, says the Ziknei Yisrael aren't going to have the fortitude to be able to remain with Moshe Rabbeinu in the face of Paro. If that's all you're saying. If you're not coming with the historic claim of freedom rooted in our heritage, then we're dropping out. And of course they dropped out. And when Moshe Rabbeinu finally got his message on track, then the Ziknei Yisrael weren't there. So that's why the mission failed. It isn't that the mission was meant to fail. The mission failed because the Moshe Rabbeinu first transmitted the wrong message. He transmitted the Uganda message, the message that there's an injustice being done, there's a problem of anti-Semitism, the higher authority is demanding our liberation. That wasn't the winning message with Paro. Having lost the Ziknei Yisrael, because that message didn't capture their imagination, now Moshe has to present the other argument, the historical argument, alone. That gives Paro the ability to think that maybe Moshe and Aaron are just two rabble-rousers, and we can nip this in the bud. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe in PARSHA Va'era, let's get it straight. We've got to start from scratch. We have to get the message clear. And that's what PARSHA Va'era is all about. It's a new shlichus. It's HaKadosh Baruch Hu saying to Moshe Rabbeinu that before what I told you, that's because that's what you would understand. But that's not the shlichus to Paro. The shlichus to Paro is rooted in the historic relationship of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Klal Yisrael. That I appeared to the others, to Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Bekel Shakai, that I swore to give them Eretz Yisrael, and therefore go and tell them that I will remember my covenant, I will fulfill my covenant, and now go to Paro and tell him that. So Moshe Rabbeinu understands it's a new mission. So Moshe Rabbeinu doesn't say, well, Paro didn't listen the first time, why should he listen now? It's PARSHA, it's not a kasha. He didn't listen the first time because the first time it was a message that first had no meaning to him, because as a command from God, he's not subject to God's authority, and speaking the name of Elokei HaIvrim, just me and Aaron, that doesn't mean anything, because he could suspect that we're just rabble-rousers. We have to make the case that there is a genuine grassroots movement in the people, a yearning for redemption, for freedom, which is something that Paro cannot just wave off. And therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu comes and tells us to Paro, and at that point, as we said, Paro can't dismiss it. Because Paro understands that if this is true, if this historical fact is true, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu had a historic relationship with the forefathers for hundreds of years, and he swore to them, and he promises to them, and there's a plan for history, then we've lost the people. They're not going to be our slaves anymore. He says the only question is it might not be true. So therefore Paro's prudent response is, well, prove it, give us a sign. If you can prove it, then we'll have to deal with your arguments. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu on Moshe with signs, there's the staff turning into a snake, there's the water turning to blood, now there are signs. Now Paro has to take it very, very seriously. Because Paro knows that if the people when they are determined to be free, then there's a limit on the extent to which you can enslave them. Now the question is, that doesn't mean power is going to give in right away. It's going to be a negotiation. But it's a negotiation which power has to engage in. There has to be a negotiation. It can't just be an outright dismissal. No, forget it, not interested, go away, mind your own business. In other words, once the people are already invested in the idea of freedom, then power understands that this is something which is more serious, this is something that has to be carefully weighed, and the story of that negotiation is the story of PARSHA, which Be'ez Hashem will read next week.